La siguiente presentación estará a cargo de Jason Craig. Jason, que nos acompaña desde Estados Unidos, es bibliotecario y tecnólogo, director de Iniciativas Estratégicas de la National Information Standard Organization. En NISO, Jason identifica nuevas áreas de ecosistema de información en la que la experiencia de estándares es útil y necesaria. Actualmente lidera la participación de NISO en la Coalition of Seamless Access. Fue director de una consultora tecnológica para bibliotecas y trabajó en el MedLab y en el Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society, ambos de la Universidad de Harvard, Estados Unidos. Además fue el director de tecnología en la Universidad de Tenesse en Chattanooga, Estados Unidos, lugar en el que dirigió los cambios de infraestructura digital de la biblioteca. Les recordamos que pueden escuchar la traducción simultánea a través del icono inferior en Zoom de la barra de Zoom, donde pueden ustedes configurar el idioma español o inglés dependiendo de su preferencia idiomática. Por último, mencionarles que pueden hacer sus preguntas durante todo el transcurso de la presentación y también a través de nuestra red social de Twitter usando el hashtag BiblioU2021. Mis compañeros Roberto e Isabel van a estar recopilando las preguntas a través del chat. Jason, quien nos presentará su conferencia AI, Machine Learning and the Future of Information. Te damos la más cordial bienvenida. Muchas gracias por estar con nosotros durante esta jornada. Te dejamos el espacio para que puedas interactuar desde ahora con nuestra audiencia. Muchas gracias, Jason.
Hello, thank you so much. I appreciate being here, and I am very excited to be a part of the conference. Let me get my screen shared. All right. Well, I'm here today to talk with you about AI, machine learning, and the future of information. All right. So let's go through. So I'd like to introduce myself, just so you know who I am and what my background is. I am a librarian. My background is as a librarian, although I have been a researcher at a number of different research institutes. Probably the best known is the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard. I am currently the Director of Strategic Initiatives at NISO, the National Information Standards Organization, but I am here talking with you today because I produced a small book for the American Library Association called Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning in Libraries, where I was the editor and wrote a number of the internal chapters. The URL on the screen will give you access to a complimentary copy of this. So if you are interested, please note the URL. You can download that anytime you'd like. So I'd like to start today by talking about where we are in the state of artificial intelligence. What do we mean when we talk about artificial intelligence, and where are we likely to be going with artificial intelligence? I'm going to talk about library-specific uses for artificial intelligence, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about where I think this is going and what we should look for in the next decade or so. So when I say artificial intelligence or machine learning or neural nets or any of the sort of jargon that comes with this space, what I am actually talking about is a form of artificial intelligence called weak artificial intelligence. I'm not talking about Terminator or thinking machines that act and behave like humans. That's what's normally considered strong artificial intelligence. Many people think that's impossible, or at the very least, so far down the technological road that it's not worth worrying about. What we have now, and what people kind of use every day without realizing it, is weak artificial intelligence, where you have a system that is trained to be very, very, very good, much better than humans at a particular thing. For instance, playing chess or playing a video game or some other sort of controlled area where the computer can learn what to do but there are a number of rules and they don't stray very far outside of the boundaries of the game. If you train an artificial intelligence in the modern day to play chess, it is very capable of beating every human. But if you asked it to play checkers, it would be something that you could beat very easily. It's not flexible. So when I talk about AI, I'm talking about the sort of weak sort of AI. But there's still a lot of things and a lot of good that these systems are doing and can do in the world. Whether you realize it or not, all of you are probably using some form of AI and machine learning every single day in the form of your smartphone. All modern smartphones use an AI system inside of themselves to do things like analyze photographs. As an example, this is the result of a search on my photo library on my phone for the word ocean. So the system found all of these photographs when I searched for ocean, not because some human cataloger attached the subject heading ocean to them, but because the system was taught what oceans look like and what beaches look like, and that beaches and oceans are often found near each other. All of these things were done inside the phone that you carry every day and happen millions of times a second every day that you walk around in the world. And so everyone is using AI right now, whether you're aware of it or not. And this, while recognizing beaches, right, is not maybe the most world changing of things. It turns out that analyzing imagery can be entirely world changing in areas like medical diagnosis. AI is becoming something that is relied upon incredibly heavily for the diagnosis of medical imagery. So you can imagine that much of our diagnosis machinery in hospitals and in medical care rely on imagery of some kind, right? MRIs or CAT scans or X-rays, and the ability of excuse me, the ability of a an artificially intelligent system to be trained, for instance, to recognize cancerous cells is an incredible boon to the world. And as a matter of fact, just a couple of years ago, AI crossed the level where it was recognizing cancerous cells in images more effectively than human radiologists, than human doctors were. And so this sort of AI is becoming, again, more and more common. It's not just in our world, in the sort of medical world, that this is happening. This is happening slowly. We're getting more AI use in the library world. I'm going to talk about a little bit about that later. But I did want to point out sort of the most interesting experiment going on right now in my mind with AI and libraries. This is actually a system that was built by a single librarian, a librarian here in the United States named Andromeda Yelton, built a machine learning system that organizes and allows for discovery of the MIT electronic theses and dissertation um, corpus that uh, is not based on subject headings or based on cataloging or anything like that, but it's based entirely on a machine learning system that understands the contents of the theses and dissertations and allows you to search them in ways that a human cataloger would not would it just would not work. A human wouldn't be able to sort of understand the linkages in the way that her machine learning system does. And so if you've never seen this or unaware of this, I highly recommend that you take a look. It's available there at the URL on the web so that you can sort of understand how a machine learning system might enhance discovery. It's also true that machine learning and artificial intelligence systems are not always used for good. There are bad aspects of the growth of AI in our world. Um, Artificial intelligence is only as good, artificial intelligence systems, AI systems, are only as good as the data that is used to train them. So you have to have enormous amounts of data to sort of teach the AI what it is you want it to do. If your data is bad, in other words, if it has a bias or if it is unreliable as far as its conclusions, if it is not collected responsibly, if there's a lot of sort of things that might go wrong, right, in the data itself. And if you use that to train a system, then you can introduce bias into your systems unknowingly. And you can build systems that do not treat the world in a way that you want them to treat the world. And my favorite example of this is that very early in the sort of new emergence of AI, Microsoft was experimenting with artificial intelligence systems and decided that they wanted to build an AI that learned how to sort of speak like a human, how to learn how to talk and respond to people as a human would. And they needed a lot of data, right? Because we need data to train the bot, the AI. Um, so they looked around the world and said, well, where are people talking to each other and where can we sort of get data to help train this thing? And someone had the brilliant idea to use Twitter as their training set and the interaction method for the AI. And so they released this artificial intelligence system. It was called Tay, Tay, um, onto Twitter, and it was less than a day before the AI became a Nazi, racist, just terrible, terrible person, um, because it learned from what people taught it. And as it turns out, if you don't use good data, sometimes your results will be awful. And so this is a sort of warning for people who are training AI bots, and you know only use data that you trust, because otherwise things can turn out very badly. AI and machine learning systems can also be sort of weaponized a bit in the misinformation and disinformation world. We are all sort of here in the modern time, modern news. We are all in a space where misinformation and disinformation is incredibly important and something that libraries fight very hard against. And AI is not helping us because, as it turns out, you can use AI and machine learning systems to um, help fool people, to help lie to people about information. So here's an example, right? So here are a couple of people, except one of them is not a person. One of them is an AI generated fake face. This is an example of an artificial intelligence system that was trained to create fake people to be used in things like advertising and political ads, etc. And so one of these two is not a real person. One of them is entirely a fake human being. So just as a very, I'm going to give you about 3 seconds here, very quickly. I want you to look at this and think, which one do you think is the fake? See if you can pick out which you think is the fake person. I'm going to give you about, a second or two to do that. You think you know? Actually, I was lying to you. They're both fake. Neither of these are real people. These are both artificially intelligent, generated human faces. as are all of these. These are not real people. These are generated by a machine in order to fool you into feeling something. And as a matter of fact, there's an entire website that just creates fake people for you to use in advertising and elsewhere. So this person does not exist.com will actually create fake people for you. Part of the reason that this is that AI and machine learning is sort of where it is in the modern moment is that we've had this wonderful growth in the availability of systems that are capable of doing it. Even 10 years ago, 20 years ago, we had computers, obviously, but they were not fast enough and they didn't have the right kind of hardware in them to be able to run and adequately sort of create these AI machine learning systems for us. And the cost of this has come down so much that you can now find this hardware everywhere. And if your library or if you're a vendor and you're listening to this, if your company is interested in getting into AI, it has never been easier. As I had mentioned earlier, your phone has dedicated AI hardware in it. If you want to play, if your library is interested in sort of experimenting with data sets that you own in AI and machine learning systems, modern computers are beginning to be shipped to you. They're beginning to be designed and created with artificial intelligence and machine learning in mind. The newest Macintosh computers that were just released a couple of months ago by Apple have in them on the chip that runs the computer a dedicated neural engine that does nothing except machine learning. So we're starting to see computers that you can purchase off the shelf that have systems in them designed to do nothing but machine learning. The new M1 and the future sort of chips that Apple is designing all are dedicated. They have dedicated areas just for machine learning systems. And way further down, sort of lower and lower cost, you can actually buy small kits for very inexpensive, very inexpensively to do experiments in the machine learning space. Now, none of these are going to be doing huge amounts of processing because this is very low power, but these are sort of systems that are dedicated to doing nothing but AI machine learning systems. Things like here in the US, we have a vendor called Adafruit that has entire systems for machine learning that you can purchase and play with, small kits that you can use. Um, a setup called Spark Fun here in the US. This is a company, again, they have a hardware that is dedicated to nothing except machine learning. And so it's becoming more and more trivial to do this work because the hardware is so inexpensive now. Also, the software is widely available and mostly open source. If you are interested in, again, sort of experimenting with AI, you've got systems like TensorFlow or Scikit or PyTorch. These are all systems that are open source machine learning systems that are designed to make it easy for people to get started in the design, the training, the creation of AI and machine learning systems. Cafe is another one, and Keras is I think the fifth that I wanted to mention. These are all things that you can look up and do research in if if you're at a university and your computer science department or your data departments dealing with lots of data are interested in working to do an AI or a machine learning setup, these are tools you can use to help make that happen. So I want to talk now, sort of get through the close of my presentation. I want to talk about where I see the future of AI in sort of a broad information ecosystem in libraries and publishing, etc. There are a number of very sort of easy solutions. That is sort of obvious ways that AI might be used. We have companies that are starting that are sort of AI from the get-go, they're AI from the start, that are basically library replacements at the corporate level. So Ripcore Digitization is a system, it's a company that will come into a corporation, come into a company, digitize their records, and then an AI, and one of their AI systems will analyze, catalog, and make them discoverable for you. So there's no human involved in the process of creating this new corporate library. It's all AI and robots. And this is a company that's up and running right now. They have software robots and machine learning systems that will basically create a library for a company from scratch. So, but that's actually a fairly easy, not easy, but it's a fairly straightforward future where library sort of systems get more and more automated. Library vendors are absolutely working in this vein. Most library vendors have in their sort of development pipeline different types of AI and machine learning systems. Many of these are being used again for the what what I would say are the sort of easy, sort of the lower level AI systems doing things like creating metadata, right? They're looking at text, and then they're creating metadata, they're creating cataloging data or other data from this. But what I want to talk about is the sort of broader research process and what I see as sort of the future of AI systems and the future of research in the library space. So I'm going to move through these pretty quickly because I want to get all the way through the sort of end idea. But the research process is fairly standard. You do research in a specific way. You identify a topic, you search for information, you find the materials, you evaluate them, you make notes, you write the paper, etc. Right? This is the process of research. All of these things are now being done by AI in different ways. Every single step of this research, doing the research, finding the new information, there are emerging AI tools that will do research for you if you tell it what you are interested in. You have systems like Kara AI, you have systems like Wisdom, Diffio, Iris. All of these are research helpers. You tell them the things you're interested in, and then they go out and find papers and research for you. You have other systems that will take notes and will actually start the process of writing a paper. Resumer, Scholarcy, AI Writer, EssayBot, Articulo. All of these are systems that take the research that you find and then summarize it and start the process of writing a paper. And then you have yet more AI systems that are designed to help you proofread and edit that paper. So Grammarly and Writing Assistant help you take a rough draft and turn it into a finished and polished paper. So what I see as the future of AI is these separate systems becoming more integrated to provide what I'm thinking of as sort of an AI assistant for a scholar, where an AI system will already know your interests and your research history. It will preemptively search the literature for things that you might be interested in. It will bring those to you, summarize them for you, and then provide you with sort of the highlights of the paper, of the papers that it finds, all sort of automatically without any sort of work by the scholar. This is sort of happening in the background, and that assistant is going to learn over time and get better and better and better as your research changes. And so these are the things I see coming that I think are on the verge. We haven't seen them yet. There isn't anything quite like this just yet, but I think within the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see some of these coming about. And I think this fundamentally changes the relationship between a researcher, a library, and the literature of the topic. It sort of changes a lot of relationships because things become subsumed in the computer rather than being done by a human. And so, in conclusion, there are issues, there are problems with sort of all of this. AI has built-in privacy implications. Here in the US, libraries have a very strong information privacy bent. And so in sharing data with vendors to produce AI systems, there's an automatic sort of privacy issue there because we're sharing data, and that data might be used for things that we don't want it to be used for. And so there's privacy problems there. I'm also worried that because we have to use old data to provide machine learning systems with training, that any mistakes in that data may just be repeated in the future. We're not actually creating smarter systems. We're only creating systems that are as good as what we've done in the past. And so we're not going to be getting better at the same rate that I think we should. I worry that externalizing the labor of research, that researchers becoming more dependent on machines, has some problem in the ethics of research, that machines may make decisions that humans wouldn't. And I think there's some ethical issues. I worry that there are problems with filters and bubbles of information being wrapped around people, and people not being able to sort of see outside of their own small bubble. I think that is a real issue for news, for sort of how people get their information about the world. We've seen the collapse of newspapers and other information sources here in the US in a way that is particularly troubling. And I worry that AI may only make sort of that filter and bubble problem even worse. But all of these areas of concern are also areas of opportunity for libraries to step in and make things better. And so I do feel strongly that libraries have a role in this world, that we understand information and information flows, and that we can worry about these, but also work to make things better. And then finally, Amara's law. Roy Amara was an American researcher who said, we tend to overestimate the effects of a technology in the short run and underestimate the effects in the long run. So we may be worrying about AI and machine learning now in sort of more than we should, but I think long-term, it is going to be an incredibly important part of what we do and how we understand the world. And so this is me. My contact information, if you would like to get in touch with me, all of this is a good way to do that. I'm going to mention one more thing before I sort of go to a question and answer. And that is that I am the chair and director of a conference that's upcoming next month, the NISO Plus conference. We are trying very hard to have a global conversation about information and about information exchanges. These are our keynoters, Dr. Margaret Scratulardi from Ghana. We have Corey Doctorow, Heather Joseph, Dr. Zeynep Tufekci, and Dr. Norihiro Hagida are all going to be keynotes for us. This is a really wonderful conference. And if you would like to learn more and attend, you can do so at http://niso.plus. And I will stop sharing my screen and try to get my audio working.
Muchísimas gracias, Jason Griffey, por tu interesante conferencia. Hay muchos comentarios felicitando la exposición, así que están muy contentos Comentarte también que tenemos más de 627 asistentes por el momento. Estamos muy agradecidos por tu conferencia acerca de este prometedor futuro de inteligencia artificial en las bibliotecas, y también es un valioso aporte para potenciar la innovación desde el desempeño profesional bibliotecario. Nuestra audiencia realizó una serie de preguntas, la cual te transmitiré a continuación, y la primera de ellas es de Melba Scarlett Escobar, que nos pregunta si el objetivo de la inteligencia artificial es construir máquinas que superen las capacidades mentales de los humanos. ¿Qué papel jugarían las personas en el futuro en este caso?
Yeah, there is a large worry about replacing people. That hasn't happened in the past. Anytime that we've had machines that replaced labor, in the past it's been physical labor, right? Machines have replaced human labor for hundreds of years. In this case, it's machines replacing intellectual labor, but that's never lowered the number of people needed to do work. It's just changed the work that people have done. And so I do think it will change the sort of work that we do, but I don't think it will eliminate work for people, if that makes sense.
Sí, totalmente. Muchas gracias por tu respuesta, Jason. Ana Talavera pregunta si cree usted que realmente la inteligencia artificial podría reemplazar toda la riqueza de la mente humana en la investigación. ¿Dónde interviene? Por ejemplo, en la intuición. Gracias.
That's a wonderful question. Yeah, intuition is and sort of feeling is definitely a probably not a replaceable part of the research experience. Humans are good at that, and machines are not. But machines are also better at humans about making connections between subjects and systems where um, humans are bad. They're sort of complementary instead of replacing. So again, I think that these systems are going to be enhancing human effort. They're not going to be replacing human effort, but they are going to be different. And the changes in the world are going to mean that we have to respond and deal in a different way than we have in the past. So.
Muchas gracias, Jason. Catalina Soto también nos consulta, entonces la labor de la inteligencia artificial sería la complementación en los ambientes de información. ¿Qué servicios y procesos dentro de la biblioteca podrían ser los primeros en ser reemplazados en la próxima década?
Yeah. As far as first, that's a really very good question. Um, I think the things that are likely to be replaced first are things like I actually think cataloging is probably going to be challenged. Cataloging has already been challenged. The sort of creation of metadata has already here, at least here in the US, been largely automated. It's not something that is happening at most local libraries. It's happening sort of upstream at the publishers and vendors. And so I see that continuing to happen, and vendors moving more and more toward AI and machine learning as a tool to do the metadata creation. Other parts of the library that are likely to continue to be challenged by AI and machine learning, I actually think that there will be some challenge in reference because systems will be better. We sort of have an example of this from the early days of the web when Google rose to power. That suddenly the need for reference librarian help in finding things on the web went down significantly because the tools got better. And so as machine learning tools get better, it will change the kind of questions that reference librarians have to deal with.
Muchas gracias, Jason. Claudia Escobar también nos consulta, desde tu punto de vista, ¿piensas que las bibliotecas están demorando en adaptar la inteligencia artificial a sus servicios por temores que no sean tan reales?
Yeah, I can only speak to why in the US context, in the United States context. Here, the challenge is that libraries don't have technical staff. They don't have computer developers. They don't have um, the sort of skill sets usually to do this work in the library itself. Some large libraries do, some state libraries do, but it's uncommon. It's not very common for a library to have someone on staff who works in this space. And so that's a big challenge. I think that's probably the case everywhere. It's not a skill set that we are known for or that libraries honestly can afford because it's very expensive to pay for someone who has this skill set. And so those two things, I think, are the biggest challenges for libraries moving forward is how to get people to work with us on this.
Muchas gracias, Jason. En tu presentación hablabas sobre la ética. En relación a esto, Enric Abad nos pregunta si existen normas éticas que estén proponiendo para el uso de la inteligencia artificial y machine learning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I know that there are a number of groups that are working both at the sort of national and international level. There's actually a research group at the United Nations working on this for ethical standards for AI systems, and those mostly relate to, again, the data sources that you can use and trying to determine whether a data source is fair and just before it is used for questions about you know humans. The biggest example of this is there are AI systems that are being used in the legal process in many countries in the justice process, for example, sentencing criminals for crimes. In the US and elsewhere, there are AI systems that help the judge determine how long someone should be sentenced to prison. And in many cases, the data that's used to, to feed those systems is data that has been gathered in racist or other very questionable ways. We have different feelings now about how sentencing should work than we did 50 years ago, and so how things like that get done ethically is a huge concern, and there are groups both nationally and internationally working on that. So I would recommend looking at the United Nations work on that. I'd also recommend looking at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard, which is where I was a fellow. There's a number of groups there that are working on AI and ethics, MIT as well. So.
Muchas gracias, Jason, por recomendarnos esta información acerca de la ética en inteligencia artificial. Tenemos una siguiente pregunta de Paola Paredes, que nos consulta dónde buscan estos asistentes de información, a qué recursos acuden para recolectar información de nuestros sistemas de información o de gestión de bibliotecas.
Yeah, I think so. If we're talking about sort of my future AI assistant, the sort of dreamed of near future that I described, I think it will be all of those things. It will be the web, the open sort of internet will be one place that the AI assistants get their information. And then also, I think it will be through library resources, databases, and other controlled sources of information. I actually think that one of the biggest challenges moving forward will be whether vendors and publishers open their data to be freely used by these sorts of AI systems, or whether it becomes a situation where licensing their data is creates AI assistants that are specialists in different places, specialists in medicine or specialists in history or specialists in something else because the data sources are so locked down and narrow. I think that it's not clear how licensing and things of that nature will go. So I think that's an unknown so far.
Muchas gracias, Jason. Tenemos una última pregunta y consultan si en términos económicos es costoso proveer a las bibliotecas inteligencia artificial, cómo son las inversiones en Estados Unidos con respecto a esto.
Again, fantastic questions, everyone. That's a really, really good question. The it is expensive. Data is expensive, and the getting the right data is even more expensive. But it's getting easier. More groups are providing data and allowing data to be shared. There is a standard in that emerged from I believe originally in Europe, but it's widely used in scientific circles now, called FAIR, FAIR, the FAIR data principles, and that insists that scientific data be released in specific ways that are shareable and that are freely available. And so the move, especially in science, is that data be more and more freely available instead of being hidden behind payment. But that again is um, reasonably new and will I think will become more important over the next 2 to 3 years.
Muchas gracias, Jason. Existen muchas preguntas muy interesantes, por la cual voy a extenderme a una más. Preguntan, ¿cuál es la característica principal que cree que debe tener un bibliotecario catalogador para competir y ganar con un sistema de catalogación automática de metadatos? Esto nos pregunta Lucas de Porto Alegre, Brasil. Gracias.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I would suggest that catalogers look at is data and data manipulation, data science, how these systems understand and interpret the data that is given to them, and then there is a role for humans in the analysis of data and the manipulation of data to allow for AI systems to use them appropriately. And so catalogers and others who have a specialty in using and understanding data are not going away. It's just that their job, I think, over the next 10 years will change a bit so that they are attempting to understand and interpret data rather than necessarily describe data. I think that's probably the big change that's going to be happening.
Muchas gracias, Jason. Te agradecemos nuevamente tu conferencia, tu valiosa conferencia,
Thank you.
y también el tiempo que tomaste para responder cada una de las preguntas que te realizaron los asistentes.